Hi there, Johnny here from johnnylipsomstudios.co.uk and welcome back to the Studio One from Scratch series. And in today's video we are going to master this song. Having finished up the mix, we are good to go. We are going to have a look at two different ways you can master your music in Studio One. If you are a Studio One artist or Studio One Prime user, you are not going to have access to the project page. Project page is in Studio One Professional only. So for you guys, the first thing we're going to look at is how you can master your song just using the master fader only. And you can do this literally just on the master bus as it is for a single song. You can just master it right here on your mix bus. If you have several songs lined up, then you can go up here to song, and then you can go export mix down. You can export the mix down to your desktop or to a destination of your choice, and then just bring that into a fresh session and just bring that onto a track. And if you've got several songs, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, as many songs as you have for your project, then you can just bring them into a fresh project, and then you can just treat them individually by EQ, compression and what have you on each individual song as you wish on the channels over here. And then you can have your master fader over here and do just final sweetening, final polishing over here. That is definitely one way to do it. So the way we're going to do it here to start with, for certain, is we're going to just do a quick master just on the mix bus here, and then it would be ready to send to a digital release if you so desire, like to somewhere like SoundCloud. So that's going to be in the next video. We'll look at digital release and all of that next time. Alright, so how do we master our song just using just the mix bus over here? Alright, so we've got our mix and we're reasonably happy with it and we're ready for it to go. So let's just do a quick review of what it sounds like, and then we will get to sweetening this baby and get it ready to go. Okay, that will do. That gives us pretty much a whole minute of kind of what the mix sounds like, and maybe what we might want to do in terms of just giving this a final polish up. So here is what I would do. We've already got a compressor on the mix bus. We've had a compressor since we started mixing this song. I'm going to leave that as is. I'm not going to touch it. So what I'm going to do is maybe just do a tiny little bit of EQ into the compressor, and then we've got this limiter at the end in the post section of the mix bus here, and that will be what we will use to bring the volume up to kind of like what I would call a kind of radio ready kind of level, which is kind of round about, we will watch this level meter here. We're using the K14 system here, and we will watch this, and we will just want it just to pop up into the yellow ever so slightly, and maybe you know, just kind of occasionally peek into the red just a tiny bit. Now those colors are not telling us that we're clipping. When it goes into the red in the meter here, it's not clipping. It's just the K system has a traffic light system of color. So green is quiet, kind of yellow color is a good healthy volume, and just red, just popping occasionally into the red would be kind of that yellow kind of occasionally popping into the red would be your sweet spot, really. in terms of a good volume for a good master. So let's get to the Pro EQ, and we will watch this when we get to doing the limiting phase. Alright, so let's have a look. Let's just play this from the beginning, and we'll see kind of how flat this is going to look and how even the spectrum is. And if we've got something pretty even, then we probably won't touch it. But let's see what we got. Okay, we've got something that's pretty even, pretty good sounding. So maybe what we might do is just give it a little bit of sparkle. So let's maybe shift this up towards 15, 16K-ish, and we'll just give this a tiny, tiny little shelf. Not much, maybe just like 1 dB or 1.5 dB. Yeah, let's just call this 1, let's round that up. So give this a 1 dB shelf. And then maybe we will just take a look at these extreme lows. Let's just bring that right down to 20. And maybe just roll that up to about 25-ish. And we'll just do a little low cut here. And we'll make it nice and smooth. We'll make it 6 dB. So just a tiny little bit of a cut here. Just to take out a little bit of the extreme lows. So let's just start this right from the top of this section here. Okay, I think that snare drum's sounding maybe just a fraction weak and not really poking through the mix very well. So I'm thinking what we might do is just zoom this down towards where the beef of that snare drum is. Around about there. And we will give this just a tiny little lift. Again, we're only talking about maybe 1.5 dB. That might be too much, but let's have a try and see. Alright, so I think that sounds definitely quite a bit better. So let's just review what we've done here. We're doing very, very small maneuvers, and the reason why we're doing very, very small moves is because this is affecting everything. So if I'm applying this shelf at 16 kilohertz, 6 dB shelf, then everything that goes through the master bus is going to go through this boost here. So everything is going to have this shelf. So every move we make here is going to affect everything in the whole mix. So we have to be careful about what we do when we're doing our EQ moves. We don't want to do necessarily anything particularly extreme, certainly with this, because we're using a lot of virtual instruments, therefore they're already very clean, very crisp, very processed. So we're not really wanting to do a little bit, we're just wanting to, you know, slightly polish this off. So in this case I did a little boost here around about 209, At first I started off at 195, but was still feeling like the snare drum wasn't really poking through. But as soon as I moved that boost along a little bit to 209, suddenly the snare drum, the girth of the snare drum started to come through the mix a little bit more, which is what I wanted. But we have to bear in mind that we are getting 209 Hertz boosted by 1.4 dB of everything. So every track has this boost in it. And then the same with this. This low cut, this high pass filter here at 25 or so. The reason why I've done this is because we don't really need this low information here. You know, it's just a lot of playback systems are not really going to be able to handle it. And it takes up a lot of energy from the drivers of most playback systems. So unless people have lots of subwoofers and that kind of thing in their playback systems, they're not really going to be able to handle this kind of extreme low stuff. So you may as well just take some of it out just very slightly. Again, 6 dB per octave slope. So it's a very gentle slope and we're not taking out too much. And that's pretty much, I think, all we will need to do with the EQ. And as I say, the compressor, we will leave the compressor pretty much as is. 100 millisecond release, 30 millisecond attack, and we'll just leave it as is. So it's nice and gentle, and it's just doing a little bit. I mean, I guess we could maybe soften off the knee just a little bit, so it's a little bit more gentle. But really, other than that, I don't think we need to do very much. So next thing we're into is the limiting here. So let's go and open this guy up. Now the limiter is very, very handy little tool. And I use the limiter a fair amount, but I use it in different ways. Most oftentimes I will use it if I'm sending a rough mix to a client so that they can review kind of what we've been doing. Say I've been doing, like I'm currently doing with a client at the moment, I'm doing production, so I'm adding tracks here in my studio, and I need my client to hear what I've been adding. But I need it to be at a sufficient playback volume that he can hear it when he's in his car or when he's got earbuds in or whatever. So I need to get the volume up to that kind of radio-like level. So this is my main use of the limiter. However, if you're mastering, this is very, very handy. A limiter is essentially a sort of fairly aggressive compressor. And it basically has what we would call a brick wall setting to it, which basically means any audio that hits its threshold, it smacks it down. And so if you have too much gain reduction going into it, it's going to pump like crazy, which I will now demonstrate for you so that you know what not to do. Let's start the song here. And we're just basically going to drive this up. Now, bear in mind, as you're listening to this, as I increase this input, it is going to get louder. Certainly the perceived volume is going to rise up. So prepare yourself and your speakers for that as you're listening to this. But you'll also hear the more gain reduction we have going into this, the more squashed the mix is going to sound, and it's not going to sound very nice. All right, so here we go. Okay, didn't want to prolong that for you, but you certainly heard that get a lot louder, but also we lost a lot of the dynamic range. So things like the trumpet became very, very shrill and harsh on our ears, and basically the dynamic range, the balance of the mix started to collapse and everything started to fold in on itself. So it didn't sound very good, and we were doing like 7 dB of limiting here, which is way, way, way too much. So let's dial that back. Now, as I said, when we're at this point, we want to be watching, we could be watching this scale here. And if we're watching this scale here, we need to be looking to kind of get this up to just kind of touching 0 here. But if we're going to watch this one, then we want to look at it getting kind of yellow and maybe just occasionally at the very loudest peaks, just popping a tiny bit over into the red. And that for me is the sweet spot. So I kind of watch both of these meters. They're different. This blue one is a peak and RMS meter. So basically, the peak is the blue at the meter all the way through at the top here, and the RMS is shown by the white lines in the middle. The RMS being the average volume, the average level, and the blue at the top here is what the volume is peaking out at. So let's run this again, and we won't be doing nearly so much. We'll be looking for, at best, maybe half to 1 dB of limiting. We don't want to do loads. Okay, here we go. Okay, there we go. Now I should explain that I've got the ceiling and the threshold here set to -1 dB. So basically every time we're hitting -1, this is getting slapped down. And the limiter is engaging. Now I could set this to 0, but the thing here that I ought to explain, and my reason why I have this set to -1, is because if you have the threshold and the ceiling set to 0 dB, what that is going to do is that when anything peaks over or up to 0 dB, the limiter is going to engage. Now, however, there is this small issue which is called inter-sample peaking, which basically means between the samples, as Studio One is listening to the audio and sampling it and measuring it, in between those samples you can get audio crossing that threshold and not being limited. And that's called inter-sample peaking, which means you can get little distortions in between the samples. And that means that things like cymbals and S's and sounds that have lots of high-end clarity to them will get very crispy and a little bit distorted. And that's something we don't want. So rather than kind of like setting the limiter as close to the edge as possible, I back it off to -1. And that just gives me a safety so that I'm not going to get that inter-sample peaking. So it doesn't matter. Those inter-samples are not going to cross my threshold. They're just not going to, because of where I've got the threshold set. And that means we're not going to get those distortions, which you can get if you have this set up at 0. So when it was saying there was a couple of points where it said -2 dB. So we got 2 dB of compression because something, basically a spike hit this -1 ceiling and was knocked back by 2 dB because it went over by 2 dB and it got smacked back down. So, but that's okay. That's only happening a couple of times. It wasn't consistent. It was most of the time we're getting about half a dB, if that, and then occasionally we get a spike that went up to like -2. Now we can handle that, and it doesn't sound like it's pumping or anything, unlike when I really cranked it. So this, to me, is probably a pretty good level. Now, I could consider this mastered. There is a lot more to the mastering process than this. And I would point you in the direction of my very good friend Ian Shepherd over at productionadvice.co.uk. He is an extremely experienced and extremely accomplished mastering engineer and has a lot of expertise in the field. But he also has fantastic resources for teaching mastering over on his website, and he has courses that you can take in mastering, and they are fantastic. I wholeheartedly recommend them. But really, if you're just wanting to get the basics so that you can get your music out there, this is the way to do it. For me, this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is the best way for you if you are a beginner to just get your music ready to upload to a digital release. This is the method that I would recommend. Okay, so what we will do is we'll end this video here and we will do a part 2. So part 2 will take a look at mastering in the project page, and also we will bring this song into a fresh session, and we'll have our song just on a single channel, and we will we'll master it that way as well. Alright, so until next time, bye for now.